good evening, or good afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. A great big welcome to you. Welcome to MGH Live, the online public program series of New York's Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. My name is Samantha Shokin, manager of public programs here, and it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's feature documentary film, The Labyrinth, the testimony of Marian Kołodziej, the story of an Auschwitz survivor who kept his harrowing memories of the camp hidden throughout most of his life until a brush with death compelled him to depict his experience through art. I'm joined tonight by the film's writer and producer, Father Ron Schmidt, together with Holocaust scholar Dr. Michael Berenbaum. The screening will follow with a discussion between Father Schmidt and Dr. Berenbaum, followed by an audience Q&A.
Now, we received a wonderful comment that I want to read and then have you respond. Amid the horror of the images, there is a humanity and a healing quality to the images that gives back the humanity to the victims, both Jewish and Gentile, Catholic and non-believer. Has this been shown in the context of genocide in Rwanda or Sudan? Who's seen it, who has been through an experience that may be somewhat analogous?
I'm not sure if it has been shown in Rwanda, although I know the Zen peacekeepers have done retreats in Rwanda. So I don't know. I know it's had wide showings in the United States, not all that many overseas. So I can't answer that, although we did have a professor on earlier who does Holocaust studies, genocide studies. I noticed his questions. So I know it's out there in the educational academic market also. The film is, of the DVDs.
Yeah. And to answer a couple of other questions, it is at the Kolbe Center, which gets a very small percentage of visitors to Auschwitz. If it were up to me, if it were up to Ron, we both believe that it really should be exhibited at Auschwitz itself, because in one sense, Auschwitz has resisted up till now in doing post-Auschwitz exhibitions, but I think this has a quality that is extraordinary and really would make a difference. How many people get to see it during any given year?
I'm sorry?
How many people get to see it during any given year, Ron?
You know, it's kind of gotten smaller and smaller. We did have it shown on PBS. It is shown at the Auschwitz, at his museum. But
how many people visit his museum?
Oh, not very many, because it's not well known. You've probably taken more people there because it's kind of remote in a small town, and they don't have schedules, so you have to arrange schedules to do that, to arrange and knock on the door or pre-schedule, make an appointment. Yeah.
But I have to testify that I take groups there after we visit Birkenau, and they are usually emotionally exhausted and wiped out and drained. And this gives voice to a certain sense of spiritualism and a certain sense of rage that they feel. What was it about, he said, about weighing the scales that was different from regular life? He said people under conditions of oppression and suffering have an acute sense of what is just. And I think that you have to understand that, and he certainly has scales in there all the way through, and you've shown it very well.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, he was, I think his insight about justice is basically, if you're, don't experience injustice, you don't really get a true sense of what is unjust and how justice plays out. So he was observing so much injustice that he could make that comment. Let me just give people my email, because there are a number of questions going on that, if you don't mind, you can reach me at schmidt.re@gmail. That's SCHMIDT period dot re@gmail.com, or reschmidt@hotmail.com to answer some of those questions. I believe I just saw a question, is it at Yad Vashem? I believe the documentary, I'm pretty sure, has reached Yad Vashem. I think you took it, actually, Michael. I made sure it got there.
Yeah, Yad Vashem has a tremendously media center that tries to get all the documentaries regarding the Holocaust, and I brought it there, and in fact gave it in Ron's name as part of the collection. Susan Levy says, I visited Auschwitz this past summer. This film was much more powerful than being at the camp. What a shame that I missed it. Well, I think that anybody going to Auschwitz should be told that this is worth seeing. And I know of no better introduction to seeing it, or no better postscript to seeing it, than the film itself. What book would one recommend as an introduction to Maximilian Kolbe?
Oh, I don't have it that off the top of my head, but there are loads of books out there on Maximilian Kolbe. And there was a question about how Kolbe got to the Auschwitz. And I just want to make a comment on that. I'm not exactly sure what precipitated. Okay. But many Catholic priests were rounded up. Catholic priests, nuns, anybody who had any influence in the community, but especially priests, were rounded up for the camps. In fact, at Dachau, they had a special barracks called the priest barracks. So it was not unusual for priests to be rounded up and taken to the camps. So yeah, I noticed somebody said here they were, her father was part of the General Patton Infantry Division. I just want to comment on General Patton and the interplay that Marian had with him. Marian, when he got to Mauthausen and was liberated, was doing drawings for the Army, the US Army soldiers, was doing drawings of them. And he told us the story that Patton saw his drawings and offered to send him to the Sorbonne after the war. And Marian had to turn him down because he had to get home to Poland to his family. So that's just a little story. And I think I answered about him and his connection with Patton. I answered the question about the Schmidt family interest, etc. And yes, all the Schmidts who worked on the film are related. That's Michael mentioned. I'm looking at some other questions. We answered the question about how long.
Let's touch for one moment. How have you integrated your priesthood in your filmmaking?
Oh,
Let's talk for one moment about that.
Well, I think filmmaking, and I haven't done any in the past few years. It's about the story. I hate to say it because we always say this. It's about the human element, the human stories, the tragedy, the injustices that people have experienced. And as somebody said in one of the comments, they said, and I think this is where my son saw it too, who did the directing and the editing, Jason, is that even though the drawings are horrific and terrible, there is a sense that we hope you come away with of hope in the human condition and that we can do better. and be better. That there's it's not so depressing that the images. And Marian had it set up so that when you finished the exhibition, it was in a basement. And again, remember, he's a set designer. So when you opened the door to go out of the basement, you would come into the light. There would be bright shining light, of course, at the daytime when most of the time people would go. So it was the idea that you would come into the light. And he cautioned at the end, be careful how you do, on the decisions you make. So I think he was trying to say ultimately that there is hope out there.
Well, the ultimate expression of hope for many survivors was bearing witness. Yeah. Bearing witness, in one sense, was not only to, it's essentially saying in a very deep way that you not only remember the past, but you believe in the future, and that the past has something to contribute to the future. And I think that this memory in particular has the most profound thing to contribute to the future, because it says, be careful, beware. And there is a real radical difference between evil and good. And we have to tilt those scales.
Yes.
We have to tilt the scales so they weigh in the direction of the good. And I can't think of a much more urgent message than that today, in a very basic way. Let's talk for a moment. The film is available, and is there a book that also goes with it?
There is a book. You'd have to contact me. I think the Auschwitz bookstores still have his what I call a coffee table book. We tried to offer them through our website, but they would come damaged from Poland. So as a group, we'd order 10 or 5 of them at a time, and they never came in good shape. But there is a coffee table book by the same title. The Labyrinth, the testimony of Marian Kołodziej.
And Samantha, we should say 2 things. Number one, we've been asked is, can you show it at the Jewish Heritage Museum? Ron and I were scheduled to show it at the Jewish Heritage Museum, and I sort of, something intervened that didn't make it possible to come to the museum to fly or to keep the museum open, and this is one of the consequences of the COVID-19 situation. And part of what we have to thank the Samantha and her programming for is for finding another way to show it. And let me say that however beautiful and magnificent it was on the small screen, it's ever more powerful on the large screen. And my role in this really is very simply, I believe in the film, and I'm a friend of Ron, and we met through this film.
Right, we did meet.
And I understand its unique power and the extraordinary quality of its testimony. So I help in whatever way imaginable to get the film out and to make sure it gets attention.
And you made sure it got in the Auschwitz exhibit at the Museum of Jewish Heritage.
Absolutely.
There's about 5 minutes on a monitor as you go through the exhibit. And thank you, Michael, for doing that. That's been very helpful to get the word out.
Okay, let's ask our audience if they want to give us any additional questions. And we'd love to hear from you, because we've done a pretty good job about going through it and answering.
Sure. So
okay, let me just go with a couple of more questions that did. As a theologian, how do you explain the Holocaust? Do you see it as a battle between good and evil? Number one, we have only a couple of minutes, but let me say this, that The question of God's presence in the Holocaust has perplexed every post-Holocaust thinker. But we have to think in a very deep way of one thing, which is, if God was present, it wasn't in the perpetrator and in the crime, but was essentially in the response to that and the people who battled against it, and in the extraordinary faith of those who retained their humanity in the face of all this inhumanity. I always believe that Auschwitz, in one sense, this or a sense of Shavuot at this moment, Auschwitz is the revelation of the anti-God and the anti-humanity. And the problem in our world is we have to give testimony to God and humanity, but to the possibility of the anti-God and anti-humanity. If you feel more comfortable, you can call it idolatry rather than the anti-God, so we don't live in a Did Marian maintain a relationship with the Jewish community after Auschwitz, Ron?
I believe he did, but I don't think, the Jewish communities, certainly when he was in Gdansk, weren't very large. But yes, he did, because he would come back to Auschwitz every January 27th. He would return to Auschwitz with other survivors. He'd come in June 14th, whenever he was physically able. So yes, he did maintain a strong relationship with the Jewish community.
And let me answer one historical question, which is Auschwitz. The Germans had a policy toward Poland, which was to make Poland a subservient nation of water carriers and and forced laborers. Their idea was to destroy the leadership of Poland, which meant essentially, since Polish nationalism is linked to Roman Catholicism, it meant to destroy the priests, the religious leadership, and also to destroy the intellectual leadership. And by the way, you have to understand something in history which most of us have experienced, which is when Pope John Paul II went to Poland and to Auschwitz in 1979, he was essentially telling the communists that they could not separate Polish from Roman Catholicism. And the great contribution to the fall of communism in a very real sense. Samantha, let's turn it back to you.
Sure. Well, I think we're nearing the end of our time for today. Unless you think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. How are you guys feeling?
Let me just answer one question. I think it was Rose Pearl asked a question about the bread. Let me just tell you that in the film we showed where they developed their own scales. They built their own little scales. And as the bread came down through the barracks, when it finally reached the prisoners or the inmates, they would then weigh the bread, break the bread up, and sort it out so everybody got an equal amount. And that's where then at the end where he says, be mindful of the scales, weigh your decisions very carefully. So it was about justice again, and in making your decisions on how you treat people. So that was the source of the bread, weighing the bread.
Thank you. There's a question here that I don't think was addressed. The question is about the narration and whether those were Marian's actual words or someone else helped with the script. How did that come about?
That came about. Those are the words in his book, in his coffee table book. There are three sources. One, through our interviews with him, we transcribed his words. We had the book where we used his words. And then for many survivors, they would leave their testimony with the Auschwitz Museum and in the archives. So those were three sources. We patched all that together. We did not make anything up. And we just used a Polish friend here in LA to do the voice work, the narration. So it was Roman Charney who did the narration, and that's the source of the words, but those were all his words. Some were obviously translated, but those are his original words.
Gotcha. And to what do you think, or what does Marian say he attributes his long survival?
Well, as I said, he said his long survival was his youth, his faith. He also did some work in the resistance within the camp, and during initial years, the Polish artists who were there, musicians, actors, would get together on their afternoon off on Sundays and reenact from memory some of the plays that they remembered. So it was that Polish artistic belief, his national homeland belief in the Polish national system, and some of it was by chance. At one point he was condemned to death because he did some drawings of the camp and it was discovered, and he was actually went off to be tried and sent back to the camp to be killed. And somebody who shared someone with whom he shared his soup a couple of days before was able to remove his name from the death list to be shot or to be exterminated. So he survived by chance in some cases, but keeping his imagination and his faith, and again, as I said, his youth. Yeah.
Michael, you were going to say something.
And no survivor survived without luck. Let me answer one more question before we get off, which is that one person asked, although there were non-Jews as prisoners, it was Jews who were marked for destruction. Many are concerned about the universalization of the Holocaust. Your thoughts? Look, this should not be the only film you see on the Holocaust. And what I found enormously powerful about both the installation and his testimony is that he's profoundly respectful of the Jewish experience and of the difference between the Jewish experience and the Polish experience, even as he suffered and he could conceive of it as this trial. He understood that the Jews had worse than suffering. They had death immediately and total annihilation. So I am less worried about the universalization as long as you tell the story of the Holocaust with profound and deep integrity. And that's what I think it did. The last point for me is many of you have said you're involved in film festivals. Contact Ron Schmidt, schmidt.re, right?
Right,
And,
schmidt.re at Gmail.
At gmail.com. And we want to get as much attention to this film as possible because it really is a profound and a spiritually moving experience, for which I'm always grateful to Ron, and our friendship was born in this film, and I believe in it.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for our friendship too, and our collaboration.
Thank you to you both, Ron and Michael. This film was profoundly moving and just words cannot describe. I want to echo your sentiment. It definitely needs to reach a broader audience. And in my follow-up email to all of tonight's registrants, I will include information about the film, about Marian, and how to get in touch with Ron. So be sure to look out for that. A few last points before we close out. If you are not yet a member of the museum, please consider becoming a member. If you're interested in these programs, we offer other programs exclusively for members, including our weekly seminar with Robert Jan van Pelt about the history of Auschwitz. So if you're interested in that, I will include information in my email, and all of this information is also online on our website, mjhnyc.org. We have all of our previous public programs listed there and also on our YouTube channel. And we are doing these online virtual public programs every Tuesday and Thursday. You should look out for those by signing up for our newsletter. And finally, please, if you enjoyed tonight's program, consider making a donation to the museum. We're closed now and can so benefit from all of your generosity at this very difficult and critical time for everyone. So make sure to look out for my email with all of that information. Thank you again, Ron, Michael. And lastly, the film itself is currently on YouTube. And I just want to confirm, Ron, will it be publicly listed on YouTube, or is that just a private link?
Right now, it's just a private link.
Gotcha.
It would be available to all of you again, but we'll leave it up for about a week. Gotcha.
Okay, so you heard it here, and I'll be sure to include that link as well. Okay. So thank you once again. I appreciate everyone who tuned in tonight from all over the country, and Michael and Ron, thank you for making this happen, even though, you know, we would much prefer to have it in person as originally planned, but still this was wonderful.
Good. Thank you, Samantha, for arranging this.
It's my pleasure. All right, take care. Have a good night.
Good night, all.